Muhammad, a name not common among the Arabs. He circumcised him on the 7th day, as was the custom of the Arabs. The first woman who suckled him after his mother was Thuwayba, the freed slave of Abu Lahab, with her son Masruh. She had suckled Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib before, and later Abu Salama bin Abdul Asad al-Makhzumi. It was the general custom of the Arabs living in towns to send their children away to Bedouin wet nurses, so that they might grow up in the free and healthy surroundings of the desert. Thereby they would develop a strong body and acquire the pure speech and manners of the Bedouins, who were noted both for chastity of their language and for being free from the vices which usually develop in inactive societies. The Prophet was later entrusted to Halima bint Abi Duaib from Bani Sa'd bin Bakr. Her husband was Al-Harith bin Abdul Uzza, called Abi Kabsha, from the same tribe. Muhammad had several foster brothers and sisters: Abdullah bin Al-Harith, Anisa bint Al-Harith, Hudhafa or Judama bint Al-Harith, known as Ash-Shaymas, and she used to take care of the Prophet, and Abu Sufyan bin Al-Harith bin Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's cousin. Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's uncle, was suckled by the same two wet nurses, Thuwayba and As-Sadiya, who suckled the Prophet. There are delightful traditions relating how Halima and her entire household were favored by successive strokes of good fortune while Muhammad lived under her care as an infant. Ibn Ishaq states that Halima narrated that she, along with her husband and a suckling infant, set out from her village in the company of some women from Banu Sa'd bin Bakr in quest of children to suckle. She said, "It was a year of drought and famine, and we had nothing to eat. I rode on a brown mule. We also had with us an old she-camel. By Allah, we could not get even a drop of milk. We could not have a wink of sleep during the night, for the child kept crying because of hunger. There was not enough milk in my breast, and even the she-camel had nothing to feed him. We used to constantly pray for rain and immediate relief. At length we reached Makkah looking for children to suckle. Not even a single woman among us accepted when Allah's messenger was offered to her. As soon as they were told that he was an orphan, they refused him. We had fixed our eyes on the reward that we would get from the child's father. An orphan! What were his grandfather and mother likely to do? So we refused to accept him because of that. Every woman who came with me got a suckling infant, and when we were about to depart, I said to my husband, 'By Allah, I do not like to go back along with the other women without any infant. I should go to that orphan and I must take him.' He said, 'There is no harm in doing so, and perhaps Allah might bless us through him.' So I went and took him, because there was simply no other alternative left for me but to take him. When I lifted him in my arms and returned to my place, I put him on my breast, and to my great surprise, I found enough milk in it. He drank to his heart's content, and so did his foster brother, and then both of them went to sleep, although my baby had not been able to sleep the previous night. My husband then went to the she-camel to milk it, and to his astonishment, he found plenty of milk in it. He milked it, and we drank to our fill, and enjoyed a sound sleep during the night. The next morning my husband said, 'By Allah, O Halima, you must understand that you have got a blessed child.' And I replied, 'By the grace of Allah, I hope so.' The tradition is clear on the point that Halima's return journey and her subsequent life, as long as the Prophet stayed with her, was encircled with a halo of good fortune. The donkey that she rode when she came to Makkah was lean and almost lame. It recovered speed, much to the amazement of Halima's fellow travelers. By the time they reached the encampments of the Bani Sa'd clan in the country, they found the scales of fortune turned in their favor. The barren land sprouted luxuriant grass, and the animals went out to pasture and came back to them satisfied and full of milk. Muhammad stayed with Halima for 2 years until he was weaned, as Halima said. We then took him back to his mother, earnestly requesting her to have him stay with us so that we may benefit from the good fortune and blessings he brought us. We persisted in our request, expressing our anxiety over the child catching a certain infection peculiar to Makkah. At last, we were granted our wish, and the Prophet stayed with us until we returned with him. The Prophet stayed with them until he was about 4 or 5 years old. Then, as related by Anas in Sahih Muslim, Gabriel came down, opened his chest and took out the heart. He then extracted a blood clot out of it and said, "That was the part of Satan in thee." And then he washed it with the water of Zamzam in a gold basin. After that, the heart was joined together and restored to its place. The boys and playmates went running to his mother, that is, his nurse, and said, "Verily, Muhammad has been murdered." They all rushed towards him and found him to be all right, and that only his face was pale. And Anas said, "I have seen the mark that was left on his chest." After this event, Halima was worried about the boy and returned him to his mother, with whom he stayed until he was 6. In respect of the memory of her late husband, Amina decided to visit his grave in Yathrib, Medina. She set out to cover a journey of 500 kilometers with her orphan boy, her father-in-law Abdul Muttalib, and a woman servant Ayman. She spent a month there and then made her way back to Makkah. On the route, she suffered a severe illness and died in Abwa on the road between Makkah and Medina. Abdul Muttalib brought the boy to Makkah. He had warm emotions towards the boy, his orphan grandson, whose recent calamity, his mother's death, added to the pain of his past bereavement. Abdul Muttalib was more compassionate and loving with his grandson than with his own children. He never left the boy fall prey to loneliness, but always preferred him to his own children. Ibn Hisham reported, a mattress was put in the shade of the Kaaba for Abdul Muttalib. His children used to sit around that mattress in deference to their father, but Muhammad used to sit on it. His uncles would try to take him back, but if Abdul Muttalib was present, he would say, "Leave my grandson. I swear by Allah that this boy will hold a significant position." He used to seat the boy on his mattress, pat his back, and was always pleased with what the boy did. When Muhammad was 8 years, 2 months, and 10 days old, his grandfather Abdul Muttalib passed away in Makkah. The charge of the Prophet now passed on to his uncle Abu Talib, who was the full brother of the Prophet's father. Abu Talib took on the responsibility of his nephew in the best way. He placed him with his own children and preferred him to them. He singled the boy out with great respect and held him in high esteem. Abu Talib remained thus for 40 years, cherishing his nephew and extending all possible protection and support to him. His relations with the others were determined in the light of the treatment they showed to the Prophet. Ibn Asakir reported on the authority of Jalhamabi in Arfuta, who said, I came to Makkah when it was a rainless year. So the Quraysh said, O Abu Talib, the valley has become leafless and the children are hungry. Let us go and pray for rainfall. Abu Talib went to the Kaaba with a young boy who was as beautiful as the sun, and a black cloud was over his head. Abu Talib and the boy stood by the wall of the Kaaba and prayed for rain. Immediately clouds from all directions gathered, and rain fell heavily and caused springs to flow and plants to grow in the town and the country. When Allah's Messenger was 12 years old, and they say plus 2 months and 10 days, he went with his uncle Abu Talib on a trade journey to Syria. When they reached Busra, which was a part of Syria, in the vicinity of Hawran under the Roman domain, there was a monk named Bahira, they say his name was George, who came out to meet them. Although he had not met them before, he easily recognized the Prophet and said, while taking his hand, "This is the master of all humans. Allah will send him with a message, which will be a mercy to all beings." Abu Talib asked, "How do you know that?" He replied, "When you appeared from the direction of Aqaba, all the stones and trees prostrated themselves, which they never do except for a prophet. I can also recognize him by the seal of prophethood which is below his shoulder, like an apple. We have found this in our books." He also asked Abu Talib to send the boy back to Makkah and not to take him to Syria for fear of the Romans and Jews. Abu Talib obeyed and sent him back to Makkah with some of his male servants. When Muhammad was 20 years of age, the sacrilegious wars, which continued with varying fortunes and considerable loss of human life for a number of years, broke out between tribes. The Quraysh and Banu Kinana were on one side and Qais Ailan tribe on the other. It was thus called because the inviolable was made violable, the prohibited months being included. Harb bin Umayyah, on account of his outstanding position and honorable lineage, used to be the leader of Quraysh and their allies. In one of those battles, the Prophet assisted his uncles. His efforts were confined to picking up the arrows of the enemy as they fell and handing them over to his uncles. At the conclusion of these wars during the sacred month of Dhul Qa'dah, when peace was restored, people felt the need to form a confederacy at Makkah for suppressing violence and injustice and protecting the rights of the weak and the poor. Representatives of Banu Hashim, Banu al-Muttalib, Asad bin Abdul Uzza, Zahra bin Kilab and Taym bin Murrah were called to meet in the house of an honorable elderly man called Abdullah bin Jadan at-Taymi to enter into a confederacy that would provide for the above-mentioned. Allah's Messenger, shortly after he had been honored with the ministry of prophethood, witnessed this league and commented on it with very positive. Witnessed a confederacy in the house of Abdullah bin Jadan. It was more appealing to me than herds of cattle. Even now, in the period of it, I would respond positively to attending such a meeting if I were invited. In the spirit of this confederacy, and the course of considerations therein marked a complete departure from the pre-Islamic tribe. The story that led to its convention says that a man from the Zubayd clan came as a merchant to Makkah, where he sold some commodities to Al-As bin Wa'il as-Sahmi. The latter avoided paying for them. The trader sought help from some of his allies from the Quraysh, but they paid no heed to his earnest. He then went to a mountaintop and began, at the top of his voice, to recite verses of complaint, giving an account of the injustices he had. As Zubair bin Abdul Muttalib made inquiries into them. Consequently, the parties to the aforesaid confederacy convened their meeting and managed to force money for the man from Zubayd out of